Sinister? Holy? Macabre? What would you call finding the skeletal remains of 3,700 bodies in an eerie underground vault beneath a church in Rome? Why are they there, and why are they so well protected? Well, you're about to find out in today's fascinating tale. It's Lady Horror here with today's story. But first, if you enjoy these stories I give you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Capuchinfriars are an order that separated from the Franciscans in 1525. Their thought was they wanted to live a more authentic lifestyle in the vein of St. Francis. They wanted to go back to the basics, living in solitude and penance. These are the friars and brothers that you would think about that take the cat of nine tails, you know, that long whip that has 9 strands of leather, and they would beat themselves in prayer on the back, hoping to get closer to God and actually gain His forgiveness for any sins they have committed. They were to live a lifestyle of extreme simplicity and poverty. In fact, they weren't really allowed to have any possessions other than their robe and shoes. And in fact, I'm not even sure that was considered their own possession. They weren't allowed to have supplies past what they might need for a couple of days. And in fact, anything that they did get, they were expected to acquire through the act of begging on the streets. And the Capuchin friars were absolutely not allowed to touch money, ever. They were also kind of famous for the way that they looked. They had these very long, thick beards. They wore their sandals without socks, and they also had these long, dark brown robes that had a very tall, pointy hood on them. In fact, that's where they got their name. These robes are the Capuchin robes, therefore they became the Capuchin friars. You would usually find them living in the poorest, most destitute parts of cities and towns. They also had a special affinity for helping those that others wouldn't. Think about the leper colonies, or the worst and most reviled criminals in the prison system. They were not afraid to go out and speak the word of God and offer comfort and support for the complete outcasts of society. The Capuchin Crypt is actually what's called an ossuary or a bone church. It consists of several tiny chapels that lie beneath the church called Santa Maria della Concessione dei Cappuccini. And anyway, I hope I didn't butcher that. I don't know Italian, so I did the best I could. Deep down within this church lies the mummified remains of 3,700 Capuchin friars. I decided I wanted to tell this story because I actually went to the crypt and saw it. And when you first walk in, your first sight, you think to yourself, this is stunning. This is absolutely amazing. But as your eyes start to settle in on details of the ornate decorations, things start to change. Your brain starts to realize that the arches, the pyramids, the frescoes, they're all comprised of skulls, hip bones, femurs. I mean, they're made out of human body parts. Your thoughts might change quickly to the grotesque and hideous. Now, the Catholic Church is going to say, you know, this is not meant to be grotesque and frightening or horrifying. Rather, it's supposed to show our swift passage of life on earth and also our own mortality. Between 1626 and 1621, Pope Urban VIII had a brother who was a Capuchin friar. Antonio Beretti. And Antonio Beretti wanted to create this crypt, and his brother, who was a strong supporter of his brother in the order, said, "Sure, I will help you do this." They even went so far as to bring in dirt from Jerusalem because it was the holiest of holy. Friars moving in from their old monastery in Via de Lucchesi actually came with over 300 cartloads of deceased friars' remains.
Bring out today!
Oh wait, no, sorry about that. Let's get on with our story. Friar Michael de Bergamo was the brother who was put in charge of the crypt. And actually, he's the dude that started this all. How it worked was that as the friars are buried in the crypt, they're buried in the ground. The longest friar who's been in the ground the longest would be exhumed, and then the next friar who has died, the most recently died deceased friar, would then be placed in the ground with no coffin where the previous friar had been. In your mind, the closest I can come to describing this, in your mind, picture how the crypts in New Orleans work, where they lay body upon body, and as the oldest body starts to decay and deteriorate, it turns to ash and dust, and it falls down a grate and it goes back into the earth. That's kind of what this is. They just, you know, rather than layering, they pull the old body out and put a new body in. Bodies typically spent 30 years decomposing before they would be pulled out and a new body put in, and before they would be basically torn apart and used for decoration. The newly reclaimed bones from the recently exhumed friar then would be added to the decorations of the other 5 rooms in the crypt. After that initial deposit of those 300 cartloads of friars was done, the living friars that were among the Capuchin order in Rome began to tell their superiors, you know, we want to be part of this. So when it's my time and I die, I want to be added to the crypt. There are 6 consecutive rooms in the crypt, and they're only lit by these tiny small windows. Now in modern time, because of the tours and everything, you'll find small electric candles, but at the time it was very dark inside the crypt. One of these rooms is a chapel, and inside of it you won't find any human bones or remains. But the other 5 rooms do feature the remains of friars who had lived and died between 1528 and 1870. So there's a long walkway that takes you through the crypt, and as you're walking from room to room, you actually have to go through these small arched doorways. For me, it felt much like I pictured myself walking through a submarine. You have to step over them into the next room. Now the walkway runs along the far wall, and on your right hand side the rooms open up for viewing. You are literally there's this tiny little 1-strand chain link fence to prevent you from going inside, but you are literally within touching distance of the bones and the mummified remains. I mean, I don't personally know who would want to reach out and touch any of that, but you could if you wanted to. You to think about it, even the archways as you're going in and out are decorated and lined with human bones. Each room is very different, and it is decorated in a very creative way, using these human skeletal remains to form arches and pyramids and frescoes, even garlands and chandeliers. They are elaborately stacked against the walls, forming these beautiful, eloquent Baroque patterns. But not everything in the rooms are skeletal. There are actually, in one room, there are 2 severed, mummified friar arms crossed like this that are supposed to represent the Capuchin coat of arms. There are also several rooms that have the mummified remains of friars, and on those remains you can see skin and hair. The 6 rooms consist of these rooms. The crypt of the 3 skeletons. Well, there aren't 3 skeletons, there's actually 4. There are 4 fully dressed skeletons. There's 2 that are lying in niches in the wall, and then there's 2 skeletons standing in the back, almost like guards. And then in the middle of the room, there are 2 undressed skeletons that we could only presume are children. This was one of my favorite parts. On the ceiling of the Crypt of the 3 Skeletons is this beautiful large oval, and in the middle is obviously the skeleton of a child. In fact, I have a picture of it here for you. Now, this skeleton in its right hand is holding a scythe. The scythe is a symbol of what cuts down everyone, like grass in a field, death. In the left hand, the skeleton is holding a scale, and this scale represents the evil and good deeds that God is going to have to judge on the human soul and decide whether that soul goes to heaven or hell. There is also a placard that's written in 5 different languages, and it says on this placard, "What you are now, we used to be. What we are now, you will be." And then there are the very self-described rooms. There's the crypt of the leg and thigh bones, which consists mainly of leg and thigh bones. But there's also 4 fully dressed Capuchin monks in this room. Then I think one of my favorite rooms is next. It's the crypt of the Pelvises. In this room, you're going to find fully dressed, mummified remains of friars, and it's very creepy because you literally can see the skin peeling off the bone. You can see little tufts of hair here and there. It's really bizarre, but one of my favorite rooms. But what I loved about this room is when I look up at the ceiling and on the walls and stuff, it looks like it's decorated with these almost like the flower of the mum, you know, there's layer upon layer of petals. That's what it reminded me of. That's the closest thing I can describe it. But as I'm looking up at it and I'm studying it and I'm starting to dissect it, I start to realize that what looks like would be the petals inserted on each other are actually the pelvises. And it takes a while for you to be able to recognize this. And once you do, you're like horrified and like awestruck, and just, I mean, it really had an impact on me for some strange reason. Next, we have the Crypt of the Skulls. And of course, there are hundreds upon hundreds of skulls in this room. Some of them, you know, they just stack them one on the other. This is a room where you couldn't even tell if there was actually a wall structure there or were the walls made out of the skeletons stacked on each other. There also happens to be these 3 mummified skeletal friars in there. And on one end, you've got this friar who looks like he's kind of politely bowing down to greet the visitors coming in the room. On the other end, you have a friar who looks like he's trying to avert your gaze, like he's trying to look anywhere but at you. But it's the center friar that is really creepy. He is facing you head on. There's just something about him. He's kind of leaning forward, almost like, I felt like in an aggressive stamp. Like you could actually see him start walking towards you. And there's a tilt to his head and his jaw, and the hollow eye sockets of his skull are just kind of staring straight at you, like he's looking deep into your soul. It was beyond creepy and beyond loving it. Then you come to the Mass Chapel. Well, the Mass Chapel is still used today for services, so there are no bones within the chapel. However, it does contain one really grotesque, fascinating, wonderful artifact. The heart of Maria Felice Peretti, who was the grandniece of Pope Sixtus V, lies within this room. The Pope was a huge supporter of the Capuchin order, and his niece was just an absolute devout Catholic. She spent all of her free time at the church praying and offering her help and giving service. Maria's heart lies within a plaque that has the letters DOM inscribed on it. DOM is an acronym for Latin Deo Optimo Maximo, which translates to the best and greatest God. In my opinion, this may be the most creepy display of all. I mean, here God, here, take the heart of my niece. I mean, do you get what I'm saying? What? And finally we have, and probably most underwhelmingly, the Crypt of the Resurrection. In this room there's a beautiful painting of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. There's not a whole lot in this room, but if you look at it, the painting is framed in the bones of a human skeleton or multiple skeletons. So it's really kind of this really bizarre thing, but in a way, if you think about it, Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, the frame is made out of the dead. I don't know. I guess I changed my mind. It does kind of work. Back in 1851, the crypt was finally opened to the public. You had to pay a fee. It was only opened for 1 week, and that was after All Souls Day. Well, when I say it was open to the public, that's not true. From 1851 to 1852, women were not allowed to view the crypt. However, today, everyone is allowed to tour, including women. Visitor guides absolutely insist that you are proper and discreet. They want you, and they will chastise you if you don't. They want you to talk in very hushed tones, and trust me, do not even attempt to take a picture in this place. They really appreciate it if you are proper and you try to cover any displays of skin. On the day that I went, it was very hot, very humid, and I had on shorts and a tank top. I didn't think they were going to let me in when all of a sudden one of the guides went to a back room, and she comes out and she's carrying this very, very long veil. I mean, it went on for yards. And anyway, I stood there with my arms wide open, and I had two lovely ladies who started at the top. They draped my hair, and then they went around me and they started wrapping me, and they wrapped me up basically like a mummy until there was no skin showing. They wrapped me like a mummy. I wonder if they were starting to prepare me for something. Anyway, in such an evocative, atmospheric place, visitors tend to have mixed feelings about it. You know, some immediately, it's grotesque, it's hideous, I hate it. Others become very emotional about what they're seeing in there. For me in particular, being empathic, having a connection to the other side, when I walked in, I felt the presence of the brothers there. And it was beautiful. I felt, the whole time I was in the crypt, I felt very calm and very serene. I felt very privileged to have the honor to see this. The Capuchins seem to have a very pronounced affinity for this kind of treatment of the dead. In fact, they have a beautiful, stunning crypt that they built that includes mummified children, and this is located in Palermo, Sicily. Also in Vienna, beneath the Capuchin church, lies the remains of the aristocracy of the Habsburg Empire. So if you're like me and you really love the morbidly bizarre, I can't tell you how much I would recommend you go and see the Capuchin crypts if you're ever in Rome. It's one of my most favorite things I've ever done and visited it, and I really recommend it. So anyway, until our next story, I hope you all take care, and I'll see you next time.